Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here, and on today's video we're going to be shooting out real gear with some of its digital equivalents. And I think this will be a mostly scientific test, not perfectly. Wasn't able to isolate everything, but that's just the nature of some of the gear we're looking at. And I'm hoping we'll be able to do this sort of thing a couple more times at least with some of the other gear I have, and hopefully beyond that if I do get a few more amps and stuff later down the road. But for today, we are going to be taking a look at the Mesa Boogie Rectifier line. And one problem in this test is that basically everything in the digital world, like VSTs or modelers, are modeling the dual rectifier. I have a single rectifier. This is a 50 watt amp instead of 100 and 150 like the triple, and the rectifier portion is diode, not tube driven. So that does change a little bit of a little bit of the sound, but not so significantly that it's unrecognizable. It's pretty much a dual rectifier on lower volume. So still think it'll do the job quite well. So the basic premise of this test is we're going to be taking the same guitar signal chain and just replacing the amp portion with different pieces of gear. So we're going to be using the same guitar, same overdrive pedal, and if I could stand to play rectifiers without an overdrive pedal, I wouldn't even have that, just to eliminate another variable. But we'll be using the wild overdrive with these settings. Then we'll be taking the amp or other digital piece of gear or analog piece of gear into an impulse response. Same impulse response every time. And I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to EQ it. I'm not going to, throw a high pass or low pass to take off the bottom end. I want you to be able to tell exactly what these amps or what these digital equivalents are doing. And because of that, a lot of times in real life, if you're recording or playing live, you'll chop off some of the frequencies that make them sound different, and so they're going to sound closer than they will sound in this test. But it was one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations. Not all the pieces of gear are going to be dialed in the same either, because 11 o'clock on the amp isn't necessarily going to be 11 o'clock on an amp modeler, but they do sound pretty close, as you'll be able to tell very soon. And if it's something that could do its own power amp simulation, I just let it have its own standalone unit. But if it's something that's only emulating the preamp, I actually borrowed the power amp for this amplifier. And that's kind of the way I would use it in real life anyway. So we'll get through all that. But starting out, I guess let's just let you hear the blind test, and then you can kind of decide which one sounds best to you. And then we'll come back and talk about what pieces of gear I used and reveal which one's which. So one of the amps in this test is obviously the real amp. This is set to lead channel on vintage mode, and none of the controls are too far deviating from 12 o'clock. Gain is right around the 5.5 to 6 range. Everything else is pretty close as well. So this is kind of the baseline setting for a rectifier for me if I'm playing with an overdrive pedal. Another one of the pieces of gear was the Moore 011. This is a micro preamp pedal that I've covered quite a few times in pedal board builds as well as a standalone review. Very impressed with this thing. I really like Moore's line of micro preamp pedals as is, but this one I thought sounded very, very close to the real amp, and this was put through the effects loop. So one of those demos you're hearing is of this pedal through a tube effects loop, which does help a lot. That does give it a bit of an advantage, but that's kind of one of its marketed use cases. Certainly one of the ways I use it the most. I'm not putting it directly through a board, and you kind of get a better preamp to preamp comparison anyway. This thing isn't quite as shiny nor new. This is the Korg Toneworks AX5G. This was my first multi-effects unit, and it holds up okay for being so inexpensive. But basically this has a US modern amp setting, which it doesn't say explicitly it's a rectifier, but it sounds like a rectifier. So we threw that in the mix for some fun, and we'll talk about price points here momentarily. The next model is the Fractal Audio AX8. I'm not holding this up too much longer. You've seen it plenty of times if you watch this channel. And on this we're using the Recto 1 red channel. I think that's what sounded kind of closest to the more vintage style single rectifiers. And the last model is the Poulin Lecto VST plugin, which is a simulation of a dual rectifier. And I did show it off just a little bit in one of the VST videos if you want to see it kind of more in a mix environment, but I'll hold my judgment for the end of the test. So without further ado, the big reveal. Well, I'm not terribly surprised by these results. There are a couple minor surprises in this test. So let's start with the most fair comparison, I think, with the real amp and the Fractal AX8. If you put them in a mix with a bass guitar and drums and put a gun to my head and ask me which one's which, I might get that one wrong because they are very close. One telltale giveaway about the real amp though is it has a lot more bottom end. And this is partially my fault, partially because I just wanted one to sound the best it could. Now on a Fractal audio device, you can go into the speaker parameters and play with the resonant frequency of the cabinet. And that drives a lot of the sound you hear in the bottom end and kind of the sharpness in the high end. And I just left that default on the rectifier model because I figured those guys have probably got it tweaked to a dual rectifier. You can't do that on a real amp. And I have this running through a load box and it's going to create some type of reaction, and once you put it through the impulse response, it's just kind of the sound you get. It's not necessarily one's better than the other, and once you EQ this properly and kind of do a high pass and a low pass on the upper frequencies, it sounds pretty much the same. So it's not really a big difference, I feel, and it's something that you could definitely sculpt out and get closer on the model. And honestly, I think the model sounds better for just a regular guitar playing, and once you put it together in a mix, that's kind of what a guitar should sound like. This has more presence on its own, but it's not always a good thing. The Kali dual pedal is also scary close. The final audio recording made it sound a bit more compressed than the real amp, but this one did feel very real playing through. Felt as satisfying as the real amp or the AX8, and that is, that goes a long way for me when I'm playing through, especially something that I've relegated to practice gear and stuff that I just take with me on the go. This is a wonderful substitute in the face of having to lug around a 60-pound amplifier. So very impressive results from this thing. And if you are interested in this line, I've got a couple reviews of them, but I think this one does speak for itself as well. For the poor AX5G, man, did this one stick out like a sore thumb. Can't say I'm shocked. It is a 11 to 12-year-old product at this point based off of technology that's probably 15 to 20 years old. I always use it in conjunction with distortion pedals for the very reason that I thought most of the amp models were just not all that good. And this I also did run through the effects loop to give it a little bit more tube liveliness, but that didn't do a whole lot. So yeah, this one definitely came in at the bottom of the pack. Is it terrible? Nah, especially for the time, it was passable, but it's not something I would put in a recording, or even play live with. The other two substitute options, I absolutely would. This one is like, yeah, give it to your little brother if he's starting to play guitar. The most surprising candidate for me was the VST plugin, the Lecto. I basically copied the same settings from the real amp, threw them on, chose the appropriate channel, and it was like, that's it. That's the dual rectifier sound. Doesn't feel as good to play as the real amp or the more 00 or 011 because you have some latency involved playing through a audio interface. But other than that, it's of superb quality and infinite value because it is a free VST plugin. So something like that is definitely something you must check out if you're looking for a rectifier sound and you don't have any cash for a rectifier. So with that, I guess we'll talk kind of the value of each one, and I'll tell you which one I thought sounded best. For my personal scores, I would give the Fractal AX8 first place. It does lack a little bit of the bottom end, the way it was dialed in compared to the real amplifier, but you can tweak that. You have like 5 or 6 more rectifier models to choose from different eras, and I thought for the sound clip, it just suited that style of guitar playing better, and just like the sound overall. Nothing really more to it than that. So I'd give this one first place. I would award silver place to the real amp within like 2% of the AX8. Really, it's just that bottom end didn't have quite as much definition, a little boominess and muddiness that I personally don't like for that style of guitar. Maybe you prefer that, that's cool. But you could dial it out with, you know, an EQ in the loop, or especially if you're recording it, just throw a high pass and that'll pretty much get rid of all of it. But classic rectifier sound, would never trade it for the world, love this amp. Third place is a bit of a toss up for me because as much as I love the Moore preamp series, the Lecto VST also very much impressed me, and they have their own value in their own spaces. So I kind of think they can tie for this one. Obviously, this is a $100 product, so you know it's not for everyone, but this transforms real amplifiers into rectifiers. As long as you got, you know, kind of a similar setup. Also great for playing through cheaper solid state equipment or plugging directly to a board. And then the VST's great for getting semi-professional quality guitar sounds for free. Hard to beat that. And then rounding out the bottom, which I think there is absolutely no debate about, is the AX5G. This thing just, it's completely out of its league. I just threw it in this test for fun, to tell you the truth, because I didn't want to have 4 contestants instead of 5. But yeah, it's all right for what it is, but it's just, you know, it has no business going up against something like this for its price point back in the day. But just because I thought the AX8 sounded the best in this test doesn't necessarily mean I think everyone should go out and buy an AX8 right now if you're looking for a rectifier sound. So if you just want you know, a cheap, easy solution to get a rectifier tone, the Lecto VST is your go-to. It's free. There's no reason not to try it out as long as you have compatible software. Said it doesn't play brilliantly compared to the real amp, but no VST does, and it's pretty close, and it does sound very good. So pretty much 10 out of 10 recommend on that one. The Moore series of preamp pedals coming in at $100 or less, also fantastic value. You can get a little bit, you know, more value out of multi-effects units and some of this other stuff Moore has if you're looking for more than just a rectifier tone, but hard to beat just a $100 pedal that has both a clean and lead channel, different assignable foot switches, that kind of stuff, and just sounds great. So very good value there. The AX8 is what I would say be the next highest value piece of equipment, considering it has like 200 amp models and everything else that's tweakable and other built-in effects. But again, if you're just looking for one sound, not so much, but very few people are nowadays, so definitely worth looking into. The real single rectifier can be found anywhere between $700 and $800 depending on age and condition. The duals are obviously going to be a bit higher, triples quite a bit higher. But if you like the rectifier sound and you want one really reliable and solid sounding amp, hard to pass up if you already have compatible gear and if you found like a fairly cheap cabinet like I did. So yeah, not the best value in the world for what it does, but it's a rectifier, you know, it's what it does. And dead last in value and sound quality is the AX5G. This is one of those things that if you're halfway serious as a guitar player, just avoid like the plague, but I doubt any of you were looking in anything like this before. But again, thought it would be kind of fun to drag out of the closet and see how much technology has progressed for the money, even in the past 10 years. So that was a fun little blind shootout. I hope you enjoyed that. I was initially going to make the tests longer. I had a couple more clips I was recording, but just kind of thought, yeah, the point comes across in the first test. There's no point in muddying up the waters. So I do plan on doing this a couple more times with different amps and gear and that sort of thing. And let me know what you thought in the comments, which one you thought sounded the best, which one you would like to have, and all that good stuff below. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.